Welcome to Building Stories, a podcast where we tell honest and sometimes funny stories about construction and digital transformation. Super excited to have Wesley Benn with us today. He's a living legend, architect, community maker, sailor, racer, pilot, passionate believer, and campaigner for our community. That's digital design, construction, and also for our industry and our planet. So thank you for making the time, mate, to come along today.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Michael. Absolutely fabulous to be here. I've been looking forward to sitting down with you and having this chat.
Awesome. So your young years, mate, when you were growing up, were there any hints that you would be involved in the building kind of architecture industry when you grew up?
Look, I think my parents are pretty happy with the outcome where I am now because when I was 4, my choices were bus driver, fireman, or architect.
And all right, you're even from 4. Wow.
Yeah, and going through a few iterations of where I end up before I got to the architect stage, working for a little bit of time in the legal profession, spending time racing cars, doing various things. I think that they were pleased with that outcome. But yes, I definitely had the young boy play with Lego, the Lincoln Logs back then, and another one called Micronauts and stuff as right from the beginning.
Awesome. Why did you choose to work in this industry then? If you're involved in race cars and other things like that, how did you end up here?
Well, I was very fortunate to get involved in racing predominantly through a friend of mine, rally cars. Who was extremely wealthy, which meant that we were able to get involved in racing without having to deal with the big sponsorship side of stuff and all the things that came as part of that. And as much as I adore the racing, I always wanted to be an architect. Like, as I said, it kind of started when I was 4. And I'd gotten a real taste of what it truly means when I was 15, because my parents in Sydney had bought a new property and were looking at either knocking down and building or perhaps doing extensions. And they'd hired a friend who's an architect and basically didn't want anything too wild, too out there. And so he came back with a series of 3 basically Quonset huts cascading down the hill with little tunnel type pieces between them to connect them for the different living stages of how you use the house. And they just went, what? So I sat down with them as a 15-year-old and said, well, given the existing house looks like this, well, you could do this, and then you could add there. We could put and do it as a big extension renovation of the existing house. And then I took what I had back then, which was the Micronauts, which is sort of halfway between Lincoln Logs and Lego in style, little plastic connectors and things, and built them a little model of what the house would look like. And that's what they ended up building. So I did all the design concepts for it. I had no training or experience. We got a draftsman in to draft that up, and we built it. So my first BILT project, I was 16, but when we moved there, so I definitely had gotten a taste for it then. So always wanted to, and we just gotten to a point in the racing where you either had to become professional, and it was truly a full-time exercise, even in off season, or let it go. And decided to let it go and go do my architecture. So I came back to Australia to study at the University of New South Wales after having raced. So I came in my early to mid 20s to do my architecture degree then, and went from there.
Yeah, we have to kind of make these decisions on what's going to actually pay us, and the racing car thing is not going to pay so well unless we're at the top. But what you work out is like, oh, hang on, wait, they're going to pay me to play with Lincoln Logs? That's what I love.
Yeah. And that's well put, because in fact, in the racing, we'd reached a stage in Group B where we were competitive and could make some money. But because we'd reached that stage, it was a question of going to Group A. And then we would be uncompetitive for a number of years again. It's that much more expensive to run. You're talking going from 8 to 10 million a year to run it to 15 to 20 million a year to run it. Yeah, that means sponsors as well. And it all becomes very much a different conversation again. And it was time to go be a real person.
Get a real job.
Yeah. Although, funnily enough, as a result, once I came back to Australia, I had about a 4-month lag before the university would start. So I worked for an architect, a fellow named Graham Hewitt in Sydney for a few months, who told me, don't become an architect. Are you kidding me? Don't do it. Don't do it. But, like all young, dumb people, I ignored that advice and off I went. And then while I was in university, I ended up taking a job that was originally part-time, just pure labor work on discovery documents, the documentation for a big legal case, which ended up becoming a full-time paralegal job while I was also studying architecture. And I had a contract with the law firm, which actually stipulated I was not allowed to talk about the fact that I was being treated as a paralegal because, of course, I don't have any legal training, where other paralegals would be very upset about it. So that became the next step and the next stage before then finally getting through my architecture degree.
So you start out on this architecture degree. You start. Where is this? Where's your first practice? Like, where does this jump into?
Yes. So I started working for an architect in 94, 95 in Sydney, and I worked for him for a few years. And then I started my own practice in 1998, and started with just one project. Managed to bring in a couple of others, but interestingly, the first couple projects I had ended up finishing at almost the same time in early '99, and so I faced a decision where I could, suddenly I don't have any work on again. So I could just say, okay, fine, I'll go get a job with somebody else and have the security of that. I'm not good at having security. I'm not good at not having stress. Or I can commit further to what I'm doing and try and better my processes in preparation for more work. At the time, I was using Vectorworks, and it had some 3D capability in it. But, if you drew a section and then decided you had to look the other way, you had to redraw your section, the usual stuff. I had done my thesis at university on intelligent building tools. And as a result, this is mid-90s, as a result, had a connection with what was Charles River Software back then, and a couple of the other companies doing early BIM technologies, also with Graphisoft and whatnot. So when this happened in early '99, I got in touch with the guys at Charles River. I think they were called Revit Technology Corporation already early '99, and got a copy of Revit 0.8. Put it on the machine and started using Revit, training myself up in that, and then started doing my work. So my first commercial project in Revit was in 2000.
I think you're going to win the battle of the person using Revit the soonest on the podcast. The earliest we got to was about Revit 8 so far, but this is 0.8.
0.8, yes. So according to Leonid Reis from RTC, RTC, I was user number 1 in Australia. So that was quite a while ago. That was quite a while. It's extraordinary to think that we're coming up on a quarter of a century ago. So
wow, yeah, actually, yeah. I don't know if we had to do the maths on that, Wesley. It's just we've gone there. Okay, so we're all getting a bit older. But oh wow! So are you the first person in Australia at this stage to be using Revit? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things that happened as a result of that, which then has been so influential in what's happened in my career and direction and the things I've gotten involved in, is that because I was such an early user, I mean, there was only, I think there was like 130 users in the US. So, and there was like 150 worldwide, something like that at the time. When Autodesk bought Revit in 2001, they assigned AEC Systems, which later merged with CarolCAD to become A2K, and which then VinZero and is now Arcand, to become the exclusive Australian distributor of Revit. They hired a salesman to look after it, and he had to go from yesterday, Architectural Desktop 3.3 is the best thing on the planet. That's what you should be using. Revit's really cool, but it's kind of a toy. You really should use ADT. To tomorrow, ADT is a great interim tool on your way to a proper parametric tool like Revit. And he did, I thought, a very smart thing, which was his first step when he was hired was reach out to people who were using it to ask them, what is it? Why are you using it? Now, I'm working for myself up in an attic office that I'd built in my home. I got plenty of time. He said, can I buy you a coffee? You want to pay for my coffee? Sure, what the hell? So I went down the road to North Sydney and had a coffee with this guy and chatted for a couple of hours. And he said to me, look, I've now spoken with 3 or 4 people, and this is the first one where I really understand what you're trying to tell me about why this was worthwhile, even given the limited capabilities in some parts of the tool as it stands today. That was really useful. Thank you. In a month, we're going to be doing a Revit release event where we're going to have some people in, give a talk. We'll have somebody do a little demo. I'll get up, talk a little bit. Would you come and talk to the group about your experience as an actual commercial user? And I was like, I've got the time. Buy me another coffee. What the hell? So I'd not really done any public speaking at that point. So I went home. I wrote out my notes. I rewrote them. I practiced them in front of the mirror. I timed it. I redid it. I practiced it in front of a couple family. All the stuff that you're supposed to do. And I was supposed to have 30 minutes to talk. Well, we got there and it started late. The guy doing the introduction took twice as long as he should. The guy doing the demo kept making mistakes. He didn't know the software particularly well. And rather than, oh, if that didn't work, we'll move on, deal with it later, he kept trying to fix whatever his mistake was. So by the time I was supposed to stand up, the 30 minutes plus questions was probably more like 10 to 15 minutes. And of course, I had the whole butterflies in the stomach and everything else about it. I just looked at my notes and, oh, shit, and put the notes on my desk, on my chair, got up and went to the podium without the notes and just winged it. And it went fine because, of course, know the product very, very, very well. But I think that's definitely skewed some of my attitude in the years since to how to get up in front of people and what you do and how you speak. And obviously now with 20 years plus in the belt, 23 years of public speaking in BIM and digital technologies generally, I'm pretty comfortable with all of that. And that event then led to starting up the Revit user group in Sydney in May of, was that 2003?
So that's RugSid, which was probably one of the first.
Yeah,
one of the first real online forums. Yeah.
Exactly. James Van de Zandt and I, James is in New York, and he set up the New York Revit user group, and he and I argue regularly about whose was first. and there might only be 2 or 3 months in it. I'm probably in trouble because this is a public or semi-public forum. I think in reality he was first, but probably by about 3 months.
Yeah.
So, and then a couple of years of running the Revit user group, RugSid, the group was very, very tight knit. Not a huge group, but very tight knit because, of course, back then YouTube didn't exist. Wikipedia didn't exist. Nobody had yet written any books about the software. If you needed help with the software and you contacted the help desk, they would say to you, "Oh, no, you can't do that." And then you'd go away, work on it for a couple of days, find the answer to how you can do it, and then call back the help desk and teach them. So your only real support was the other users. It was the user group. So after a couple of years of running that user group, the group said, "Look, it's really great that we get together once a month for a wine, but it would be fun to do something more than that." And being very Australian group, it was, we should go camping for a weekend and geek out and get shit-faced. So a very, very Australian goal for the event. And I hope I'm allowed to say those things. So I said, yeah, sure, why not? Buy me a coffee. So I put on an event, just grabbed some of the people from my office. I had about 25 people in my office at that point, my own architectural practice. So I said, yeah, I'll put something together. And after about 3 months, we had 90 people up in the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney for a couple of days. And sure enough, the morning of day 2 started with about 10 of us sitting in the lobby, having closed down the bar, having emptied all the bar fridges in all of our rooms, suddenly realizing the sun was coming up and scuttling away like cockroaches to have a shower and get ready for that day's activities. So in terms of our goal statement, I think we were dead on. So it was great fun. And that's led to a whole lot of really interesting things since.
And was that when RTC was imagined, or is that just kind of like some kind of bigger community event that evolved over time?
It's interesting because when I started the event series, did not have a broad goal, did not foresee what it's become. The international nature of it, the potential influence that it might be able to have, and therefore the positive changes that it could help to bring. Didn't see any of that. It was just, we'll go away for the weekend. And then after that event, that was fabulous. Let's do it again. And it was only, so that was 2005, that first event. And it's probably only like 2008 or 9 where we really started to think about, this could expand, this could become something more. And probably only 2015, at which point we had ANZ and North America and Europe, and we're in the active planning for Asia events, where started to recognize the scale and rapidity of the growth in those few years and what this might become, and therefore some of the other things that it would lead to. I mean, the very first event was actually called the Revit National Congress, and very quickly decided that name was limiting in a couple of ways. First of all, national is just limiting. And Congress, well, think about America, that's a bad word, and it's only gotten worse. So changed it to the Revit Technology Conference straight away, which of course was a play on the Revit Technology Corporation, which was what Charles River Software became before they sold to Autodesk. And in fact, our logo back then, which was a series of 3 swooshes, was a reference to the old Revit logo back in the Revit 2, 3, 4 days.
Green one, light
green
one.
Yeah, and the dots that go up in that swoop.
Yep.
And then again, it was in the early to mid-teens when started looking at that name and saying, well, that's too limiting. Because the simple reality is, as a event environment and as a community that is built, run, and designed for us, architects, engineers, contractors, facilities managers, etc. You would get a software developer, whether it's Autodesk or Nemetschek or Bentley or whoever, they will tell you that their software will design your building, build your building, wash your car, put your kids to bed, and do your taxes.
And buy you coffee.
And buy you coffee. And buy you a coffee. Whereas, of course, we know that that's not true. And that, for instance, Revit might be my favorite tool and a fantastic tool to do this and this and this, but the stair tool sucks. And, this thing here, the group system just doesn't work. And therefore, when I want to build a really fancy stair, I might go use this tool. And so I need to know about that tool, and I need to know how to bring that tool into my work set and most effectively coordinate the pieces to get to the end result. So you might have a central tool in your work set, Revit, but it's still a part of the work set, the combination of all the tools. And so we have always been hyper aware of that and been working very hard to ensure that what we put in front of people at these events and what we try and evangelize for our industry overall is reflective of that. And over time, the further we've gone, the broader that's become, to try and ensure that all stakeholders in the full life cycle of the built environment are in those conversations. Because unless we understand as a designer how the contractor thinks and how they build, the construction logistics side of things, you're never going to be able to build most effectively to take those things into account. And what does that do to construction costs? What does that do to operating costs? As an architect, we get high visibility because the end result is a visible manifestation of our idea. But our piece of the process is only a couple percent of the process time and a couple of percent of the process cost. So, if we can be better as designers, more efficient, more effective, less wasteful, the flow on impact just is orders of magnitude. So it's always been very important to us that we have everybody involved in that conversation, and all the possible ways of doing things are a part of that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, Revit itself started as an architectural tool,
yes,
and kind of branched out, but your event started in a similar space and now has gone to become a cross-industry, global, juggernaut, really. That is just awesome.
Yeah, and even the name now, because it started as Revit National Congress for 1 year, then it became the Revit Technology Conference, or RTC, because we tried to do the KFC thing to it to de-emphasize the word Revit, and of course it's now referred to as BILT. BILT stands for Buildings, Infrastructure, Life Cycle, and Technology. Right, the pieces that make up the process across the whole of built environment, and reflective of what we're trying to do in that community environment.
You said before you're not good at not having stress, and so that means that a lot of challenges must have come along your journey. Can you name some of those big challenges you faced?
Certainly. In my architectural practice, I built up and I peaked at about 32 people in my practice, doing a lot of commercial work. For instance, we did all the design documentation for Woolworths across Australia. We did all the work for Dome Coffees, some companies like that as bread and butter stuff, and then doing houses and a few larger projects. So, I mean, the first big one was 2008, the global financial crisis. And I went from an entirely self-funded growth process with never having had any debt of any kind to suddenly having several $100,000 in debt and thinking, oh God, how do I service this? One of the great cliches about architects is they're terrible businessmen. And certainly the educational system at university level doesn't do a good job of teaching people that. And it's not intrinsically part of the personality of a design architect to deal with those things. So, there was some very sudden and very harsh lessons to be learned and applied to survive through that period, which we did. But about 3-4 years later, 2011, I ended up shutting down the practice because 2012, because I could see what was starting to happen with these events and this community, and starting to glimpse the far horizon and what the possibilities might be to have influence related to trying to improve our global climate and environment through new technology and new process, just improving our industries being more efficient, more effective. I mean, we use the built environment uses 52% of the world's energy production. It generates 31% of airborne pollution and 33% of physical waste. And most of that is just because we are by far the least productive and efficient industry on the planet. In fact, we are less productive as an industry today than we were in 1965. We're only 4% more productive than we were in 1918. That's absurd. And there's reason to go in a longer environment about why all that occurred. But the interesting thing to me is that when we look at the stuff that the three of us are talking about and our community is talking about, we have the tools, we have the processes and technology, we have the understanding to be vastly more productive. So the question is, how do we put the rubber on the road? How do we apply these things effectively and in a time frame to make a real change? Look at what happened during the pandemic with the factories around Beijing shutting down because of the pandemic, and the way the pollution in the area, when you look at radar photographs of Beijing, the way the pollution just vanished. And pollution there is terrible. And then as those factories started back up in late 2022, just seeing it all come rushing back in. Late 2020, people in India talking about the fact that they can see Mount Everest for the first time in 25 years. So we have a huge impact on our environment, and we have the tools and technologies to be better. So at that point, I was starting to see this might be a way to help push things in that direction, help move that needle 1%. If we use half the world's energy production and we were 1% more effective, how many coal-fired power plants do we shut down? I mean, simple things like that. And as we all know, these tools suggest far more than that. The other then really big impact was, of course, the pandemic. The Digital Built Environment Institute, my organization that puts on the events and does some other bits and pieces, up through 2019 generated all of our revenue from gathering large groups of people into small spaces. That is not the perfect pandemic revenue model. So from 2019, where we had the organization right where we wanted, and we were just starting an expansion process, some new, more sophisticated tools, bringing in some extra people, looking at starting something maybe in the Middle East or South America, going into 2020 and seeing our revenue drop by 97%. And of course, our expenses dropped by 5%. So that was awful. We sent everybody to work from home in March of 2020, like everybody did. We kept the office in North Sydney. until the end of 2020, and then we closed the office and said we'd be going from a largely work from home environment permanently. But when early 2021 rolled around and COVID got its visa extended and wanted to stay for a while longer, we realized that we couldn't continue to cover those expenses, and we ended up middle of 2021 having to shut down our internal management team. Heidi, Earl, Gabby, Ellie, Kat, etc. That team that we built up over the previous 15 years to run our events. And people like Heidi Earl, well, she'd been with me for 13 years. I mean, she was there from year 2. Her father was an attendee of that first event up in the Blue Mountains and introduced me to Heidi as someone I should talk to. So, right from the very beginning. So that was very hard. That was something we really didn't want to do. And then trying after that to work out how to go forward. And one of the fascinating things is when you've got a team of people that have been there from the beginning, and most of the other people in the team there were for 5-8 years plus as well, is so much of the knowledge of what you do and how you do it is entrained. It's just known. It's in your head because you've been doing it for so long. And that team functioned so well and so smoothly and was so good at the details that a lot of that was never written down. We all just knew what we had to do, how we interacted, who to ask what, and everything works extremely well. So there's been a lengthy period of trying to recapture knowledge, rebuild systems and everything else, at the same time as the general global economy has been slow to recover. Our industry itself has been very nervy about things going on, etc. So we're a not-for-profit. And I've always liked to tell people we're really, really good at that. But that's not necessarily a good sign. So we've always had this attitude of, look, we don't need to make a profit. It doesn't matter. And if this event makes a profit and that event makes a loss, we'll cover it. Or the Asia events always made losses. But we believe, again, because of the mission, it's important to do those events. So those events were being carried by the American event or the ANZ event financially. It meant that we went into the pandemic without a safety net. So I ended up using all of my savings to keep things going through the middle of 2021 and wiped myself out financially. In order to keep people fed, in order to keep the doors open, so that we could get to a point where hopefully we could start to rebuild again. So, I suppose the other thing in terms of things being difficult is when I died. And that was at the end of 2019. So
what?
I suppose I should mention that as a difficult issue in your career path.
Where are you calling from?
I returned to Australia from our European event in October, which was in Edinburgh, Scotland, and got quite ill and went into the hospital. I was in hospital for about 6 weeks, and turned out it took them more than a year to really figure out what was going on. But it turned out that I had an overlap between two really significant viral infections and a parasitic infection, which I'd picked. So I'd picked up a parasite in the jungles in Venezuela in 2017, and I didn't know. And my body was dealing with it, and I was okay.
Fighting it.
But what it did do was it then suppressed my immune system, so that when these viruses hit me in end of 2019, already being run down, they became much more significant than they were. And so at a point, a couple weeks into this stay in the hospital, I basically just stopped, and so my parents happened to be coming in for a visit at that moment. I don't know how long this period was, but at that moment, and couldn't get me to respond. So they start shouting. The nurse comes in and hits the big red button on the wall. And I came to with like 6 doctors in there and, 2 needles in each arm and people shouting. It was very interesting. So,
Wow.
yeah, so I then had the next. So that was then the period right before the pandemic. Of course, we had the massive bushfires in Sydney, then across the Christmas period. And then as I came out, it was just as the pandemic was starting up. And I then had a lengthy period of recovery and some relapse situation because there was some damage to the hippocampus, and in particular to the adrenal gland. So I had several periods where I would only be awake once a week and I would only be asleep once a week. So I would sleep for 3 or 4 days, wake up for a day, sleep for a few days, wake up for 4 days, and back and forth. And very
Wow.
fortunate, silver lining terms, that was during the pandemic, so we weren't wildly busy or anything. So lucky in those terms, but lots of things that have gone on in these last 4 years that have definitely stretched the capability to manage things. I am by nature a very optimistic person, and I'm always looking for the best outcome, and I'm very passionate about the things that I believe in, so I push myself through them. But in the pandemic, unfortunately, I was married for 22 years, but I separated in 2016 and divorce was in 2018. So then, living alone in the pandemic and not being able to visit my kids, even though they were 20 kilometers, 15
Can be
kilometers
tough.
away, lots of that sort of stuff. But all of these things lead to who you are, and what you're capable of and the directions you go over time, so you just chalk them up as part of the experience process and absorb and
Yeah, you
move
got
on.
through it. Yeah. So we've heard about the lofty mission, which you've been largely successful in. What are you most proud of in your career to date?
Funnily enough, as a individual specific item, I would say I taught at University of New South Wales for a couple of years during this process as well. And with first year design students, second and third year computer science in design students, and some fourth year stuff as well. And the thing I'm proudest of is 2011, I believe, being awarded the favorite teacher award at the university from the faculty of the built environment. The sense of satisfaction from being able to inspire and influence the next generation towards what they want to achieve and how they will do it is infinite. So I think that the individual thing I'm most proud of would definitely
Speaks a
be
lot
that.
to your generosity, mate, that you wanted to do that, share with people, and that's what you've done with the event as well. So you won the teacher's best teacher award, and that's pretty fulfilling, eh? Pretty fulfilling
Yes.
moment.
Yes, very much so, very much so. And then there's moments in terms of sudden design inspirations that you do in projects and things of which you're proud.
So you mentored these students, but what is one piece of advice you would give to someone right now who's interested in working in design or construction? Yeah, so that piece of advice was to take a job labouring, yeah, while
Yes,
you're
yes.
studying. Yeah.
You will learn as much in a summer
Awesome.
job laboring as you will in your first year or two in a design course.
Now we sometimes, well, we all make mistakes, but is there any particular mistakes that you'd care to share that maybe have a hidden lesson in them for us?
Saying yes to that coffee. I think there's
Which one? The Revit guy won? The Revit guy? Yeah, okay.
There's a couple of things. One is learning to say no more easily, more regularly, not trying to do everything for everybody, recognizing where your best value is, and focusing on that. The other thing, when you think about it in business terms, and even just as an employee, is recognizing your value. So it's often that we will say, "Oh, I can't charge $200 an hour to do this consulting. No one would pay for my time. I'll charge $50 an hour, and it'd be great if I can earn this." But the funny thing is, and sometimes that works backwards. It says, one, you're not confident about your capabilities and your value to that client. And it's telling them that, and so it's underselling. And two, by saying that, sometimes the people you really want as clients don't hire you because they think you're too cheap and wonder why you're so cheap. So that's two things: knowing when to say no, or learning when to say no, and also learning how to genuinely understand and accept your true value in those processes.
Great advice.
Yeah, real good one. And so, Wes, what are you most excited about as you look forward now? Like, I see, you know what? I kind of see there's this Venn diagram. Wesley Benn's in the middle of this Venn diagram between technology, people. Like, you've brought so many people together across all of these different events. You've always been about technology, and you're about this built environment. So where, out of those, where do you kind of look forward to? What's getting you excited about the future?
Well, it sounds cliched in some ways because it's current buzzword, but I've been following and talking to people about artificial intelligence for about 20 years now. And I personally believe that on the longer term time frame, we are heading for an environment where ASI, artificial superintelligence, is the ruling entity within our society on a multi-planet basis, and that we'd be looking at questions like universal basic services or universal basic income, that work becomes a choice, not a requirement, that the vast majority of the things that we do will be done by AIs because they're faster, better, safer, cheaper. And so we become the bottleneck. And some aspects of this we're talking about in really quite a short time frame. And there are people in industry who vehemently disagree with me, and we have interesting arguments about this. But so the question then becomes, if we reach a point where we're working because it gives us something to spend our time on, what does that mean in terms of our psychology, our physical circumstances, how we understand value and what that does? And that's one of the things I'm really interested in actively working towards and trying to understand. I mean, the way we look at AI today in our industry itself is very much, how do I take this AI tool over here and apply it to my work to help me? And there isn't yet much of the question of, what do I do for work once the AI can do my job better, faster, safer, cheaper? Then what? Who am I and what do I do? And do I become like a project manager where my job is to interpret and understand the needs of the clients and translate that to the AI that's actually carrying out that work? Or what does it become? And I think there's a very fascinating corollary between what we're likely to see over the next couple of decades and 15th to 17th century Europe and the royal classes. At the time, one of the definitions of the bourgeoisie was that we do not work. It doesn't mean they didn't have things to keep to make use of their time. And in the best of circumstances, that time was used for the betterment of mankind. Often it was for more garden parties and more French cake. But nevertheless, it gave time for other expression and the flowering of the arts. So, I wonder about those sorts of things and what will happen there. So I'm fascinated in the short term over the next couple of years to be experimenting with these tools and the way that simply talking to my computer and having a back and forth conversation with it, seeing something grow almost organically in the computer based on our conversation and the iterative processes from that. But then what happens as the AI accelerates past that, and what it does to us societally, if that's a word, at a societal level. So.
Wow, that's it's quite existential. Yeah.
I have a tendency to like the big problems, the big questions.
Yeah, I think there's this ear to the ground, like back in 2001 or 99. You've got your ear to the ground to this tool that's going to come along, and you're in the right moment in the right time. I think, is that what you're going to tell a construction company now or an architectural firm over the next 2-3 years? It's imperative that you listen carefully to what's going on around you. Because clearly, those moments when you're unpacking Revit 0.8, you've got no idea what the rest of this is going to look like. But it's a critical moment. You're there. It's the coffee that you had, the first presentation. All of these moments have stacked together. Where we are right now in time is pivotal for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And you look across history at the various inflection points with the first industrial revolution, the second, even the Bronze Age into Iron Age, and all these sorts of changes, and the changes from the industrial age to the digital age, and now we're talking about the digital age to the intelligent age, however you want to define that. I think that this change that we're just stepping into now is far more significant than any previous revolution that we've been through in the past. And every revolution, whether it's the invention of the steam engine in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the inventing of the printing press, and changes to education and everything that came out of that, there is a period of chaos. That there is job loss, there is uncertainty, there is pain, there is violence. And I believe we are going to see that as well. So you come out of these things, and in every case so far, it has led to significant improvements in quality of life, in medical outcomes, in understanding of arts and sciences, in every single one that we've seen so far. I believe that will be the case again. So the question will become, how do we account for that likely period of chaos, and what do we do to try and limit it? We're not going to avoid it. How do we limit it? So that becomes a fascinating point for me in that process.
Maybe it's the last few years that have just prepped us for the wild ride that's about to come to us.
Yes. It could be a dry run.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point. We've just had a dry run.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, just when you thought things were settling back down, it's okay. Wes, here we go. Round 4, 5. What are we up to now?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
We talked to a lot of people, and the word data means different things to them. What does it mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. Data to me it's the background to decision making. It's the ability to make a decision on a logical or rational basis rather than an emotional one. Emotions themselves are in fact data points, but it's better to try and convert them into data to then feed them into the process. So, people use terms like big data and all this sort of stuff regularly. And I guess I would just say it's the underlying basis on which you make decisions. I really hadn't thought about the definition of the word itself in that way. I'm going to have to think about that some more.
Well, because people are, obviously text, or is it a file, or is it a database, or but it's something more amorphous than that, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. So for me, yes, it's definitely more amorphous than that. I mean, I as a designer, people talk about the forest and the trees. For me as a designer, I always like to play with the leaves and the forest. I was never much for the trees themselves. And so for me, even though I try and work at a lot of very high level things, strategic questions, I love also to dive deep into a data set in Excel and play with formulas that I don't understand yet to see what happens. I love to get right down into the nitty gritty of that. So for me, data is far more broad than a file or a set of numbers or whatever. It includes emotions, it includes environment, it includes historical trends. All of these things should simply become data points to inform a decision-making process.
I remember learning Revit for the first time, and it's often, what helped me was learning, well, underneath all of this wrapper is just a big database. Mm-hmm. And I think, picking up on what you're saying, we're just wrestling the data. These are points down here, but what we're really trying to articulate, our vision is this model, this image. Mm-hmm. That's what was coming out of our imagination into the screen, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of these podcasts, Wes, we have this quick fire round where we ask some pretty sort of random questions. but one of the questions is, you've got a set of tools to choose from, and you've got the choice before you. Maybe this is going to go back to your Lincoln Log days. What are you going to pick? A hammer, a screwdriver, or duct tape?
A hammer is a blunt force tool. Duct tape is a repair tool. I'm very much a screwdriver guy.
It's a bit of finesse in there. You could just tighten a thing up.
Yeah.
There we go. And I'm curious about this one, actually, being an architectural background here. Concrete, steel, or timber? What have you've got a material selection there?
Timber. I love the warmth of it, the tactility of it, the feel under your fingers, the ability to work with it. I'm desperately looking forward to a point where I can get all my tools back from my sister's garage in Sydney and, build decks and pergolas and things like that again. So yes, I'm a timber guy, although I do really love the feel of raw concrete too.
Yeah, nice. Now, this last question here, I think the first RTC I attended was back in maybe 2009 or 10 or something like that. I think that was the first one. And at the end of the conference, there was this tech demo. You're going to have to help me out here. What it was called? There was like this gadgets session or something. Was it gadgets and gizmos or something like that?
Glorious gadgets.
Glorious gadgets.
Okay. So the question is, have you got a favorite piece of hardware tech that you're using, or that you're interested in? What's the latest for you that gets you excited?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. I still really enjoy playing with drones and drone technology generally. I would love to get a hold of some form of humanoid robotics and play with that, learn from that in terms of what you can do. So I'd really enjoy that. At the same time, the things we're seeing in the VR world. And now with the Apple Vision Pro coming out and the Quest 3 and the things that we're looking at in the next generation of those tools, what is likely to happen in terms of, excuse me, well, in NVIDIA would talk about the omniverse. The environments that we saw in movies like Ready Player One. We're quite close to that. So what happens with all of those sorts of environments and how those changes? There's a fabulous science fiction writer by the name of William Gibson. He was writing from, I don't know, late 60s, maybe early 70s through 90s, and is considered to be one of the people responsible for quite a bit of the terminology that we use in VR and the initial concepts of what a VR world might look like and how we interact with it. So, if you ever want to read up on some of the ideas that we're headed towards now, William Gibson is a fabulous author to have a look at.
Cool. I'll check that out.
One of the coolest gifts we got I remember when you were a speaker at BILT, you used to get a little gift. Mm-hmm. One year we all got drones. I remember that. That was pretty cool.
and we did that at the event that was Washington, D.C. So we were right across the river from the Congress, the White House, all the government buildings. And so I called the FBI before I bought all those drones to ask them if I was to give 100 drones out to a bunch of speakers, and then one evening 100 drones suddenly lifted off from the river across from the White House, how would you react? And they politely suggested we not do that. But yes, they were. That was very cool when we did that. Very cool.
Awesome.
That's cool. Well, Wes, we might wrap it up there, but thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. It's just been fascinating, and a bit of nostalgia there as we think back. Both Luke and I are probably early days at the RTC. Mm-hmm. I travelled over from Adelaide, and thank you heaps for everything that you've shared on the show today. It's been really good.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. Look, my apologies again for a little bit of bandwidth issues there, but I hope it hasn't disrupted things too much. But yeah, it's good fun and great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it probably can't be summed up in just one thank you, but we certainly appreciate all you've done for the industry, all the effort that you've put in, all the sharing. You really set a pattern for so many people to share, their knowledge. So thank you so much for that as well.
Well, thank you guys. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, but as I said earlier, I'm a passionate believer in the journey and the importance of where we're headed, and still am.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, mate.